Ethan Parker used to believe that love failed loudly. He imagined betrayal arriving with slammed doors, raised voices, or dramatic confessions that left no room for doubt. Instead, when his marriage ended, it did so quietly, through long pauses at the dinner table and messages read in silence. Laura Bennett had once been warmth itself. When they first met, she laughed easily, spoke with her hands, and made Ethan feel chosen in a way he had never felt before. They built a life that looked stable from the outside, shared routines, a modest home, and later, their son Oliver, who arrived like an anchor, steadying them both. For a while, Ethan believed that was enough. Over time, Laura began to drift, though the change was subtle. She stayed later at work, guarded her phone more carefully, and spoke about her day in clipped summaries rather than stories. Ethan noticed these shifts but told himself they were temporary. Stress, ambition, adulthood. He blamed everything except what frightened him most. He had grown up watching people leave, and he had promised himself that if he loved someone deeply enough, they would stay. Ethan tried harder instead. He woke earlier to prepare breakfast, helped Oliver with school projects late into the night, and made sure Laura never had to ask for practical support. Yet emotional distance has a way of expanding no matter how carefully one tries to fill it. Laura thanked him, but gratitude was not affection. Her eyes no longer searched for him when she entered a room. The truth revealed itself on an ordinary evening. Oliver was asleep, the house unusually quiet, and Laura's phone lit up on the kitchen counter while she showered. Ethan had never checked her messages before. He didn't want to become that man. But the screen glowed insistently, and a name he didn't recognize appeared again and again. Daniel Reeves. The messages were careful, almost restrained, which made them more devastating. There were no explicit promises, no declarations of love, just shared frustrations, private jokes, and lines that ended with, "I wish you were here." Ethan felt something inside him loosen, as if his chest could no longer hold the weight of what he was reading. When Laura came out of the bathroom, towel around her shoulders, Ethan didn't raise his voice. He simply asked who Daniel was. The pause before she answered told him everything. She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize immediately either. She said she felt unseen, unheard, and exhausted by being someone's wife instead of herself. Ethan listened, though each word cut deeper than the last. He wanted to argue, to remind her of all the ways he had shown up, but he stopped himself. Love, he realized, does not defend itself well in the face of indifference. Laura admitted the affair calmly, explaining it as if it were an unfortunate but understandable outcome of emotional neglect. She spoke about Daniel as someone who listened, who made her feel alive. The conversation ended without resolution. Some endings do. Laura moved out within weeks, leaving behind furniture, shared photographs, and a silence that felt heavier than anger. The divorce papers arrived quickly, efficient and impersonal. Ethan signed them without protest, though his hands shook as he did. Single fatherhood arrived without ceremony. Mornings became rushed, nights stretched long, and Oliver's questions grew more careful. He asked where his mother was, but did not ask why she had left. Children, Ethan learned, often sense what adults try to hide. Oliver adapted, but sometimes Ethan caught him staring at the door as if expecting someone to return. Ethan blamed himself more than he blamed Laura. He replayed moments from their marriage, searching for the exact point where he failed. Had he loved her too quietly? Had he mistaken reliability for devotion? These questions followed him everywhere, including back to work after months of leave he could not afford to extend. Returning to the office felt like stepping into a life that had moved on without him. Conversations flowed around him, projects advanced, and no one asked about the parts of him that felt permanently altered. He preferred it that way. Pain was easier to manage when it remained invisible. Yet even as he settled into his routines, Ethan carried a persistent fear that Laura's words were true, that something about him made people leave. The idea clung to him in small moments. When Oliver fell asleep holding his hand, when the house felt too quiet, when he caught his reflection and barely recognized the tired man looking back, he told himself he was finished with love, at least for now. His responsibility was clear. Oliver needed stability, not uncertainty. Ethan would be enough for both of them. Still, beneath that resolve, an unspoken doubt remained, waiting for the next chapter to test IT. As Ethan closed his laptop late one evening, preparing to leave the office, he didn't know that the life he was rebuilding would soon be challenged again, not by loud betrayal, but by something far more complicated. Ethan Parker did not intend to rebuild his life at work, but routine has a way of becoming refuge. He arrived early, left late, and measured progress in completed tasks rather than emotional milestones. The office offered predictability, something his personal life no longer provided. It was there, amid spreadsheets and quiet hallways, that Claire Morrison began to notice him. Claire was efficient to the point of intimidation. As Ethan's boss, she carried authority easily, never raising her voice, never wasting words. People respected her clarity and kept their distance, assuming confidence meant fulfillment. Ethan made the same assumption at first. Their interactions were brief and professional, limited to deadlines and expectations, and he appreciated that she never asked questions that required personal answers. Gradually, their paths crossed more often. A project deadline forced late evenings, then another. The office emptied until only a few lights remained on, and silence settled in a way that felt less oppressive than the one waiting at Ethan's home. Claire brought coffee without comment, setting it down beside him as if it were part of the job. Ethan thanked her and returned to his screen, grateful for the absence of obligation. One night, as they reviewed figures that refused to align, Claire paused longer than usual. She stared at the window overlooking the city, its lights scattered and distant. Without turning, she remarked that she envied people who went home to noise. Ethan glanced up, surprised by the admission, but said nothing. Silence, he had learned, could be a form of listening. Claire eventually faced him, her expression unguarded in a way he hadn't seen before. She spoke about her apartment, how quiet it felt after years of shared space. She mentioned a divorce in passing, as if it were an old injury that still ached in bad weather. Ethan recognized the tone. It was the voice of someone who had learned to speak carefully about loss. Their conversations expanded slowly, never crossing into territory that felt reckless. They talked about work, about Oliver's school schedules, about the pressure of being dependable when no one sees the cost. Claire admitted she admired how Ethan managed responsibility without complaint. He responded that admiration often hid exhaustion. The honesty surprised them both. One evening, after a long pause between sentences, Claire said softly, "No one wants to date me." The words sounded less like self-pity and more like a conclusion she had reached after years of quiet observation. She laughed afterward, as if to dismiss the statement, but the laugh didn't reach her eyes. Ethan felt an instinctive urge to reassure her, then stopped himself. He remembered how easy it was to offer comfort that could be mistaken for invitation. Instead, he told her loneliness distorted perspective, that worth wasn't measured by who stayed. Claire nodded, though it was clear she wasn't convinced. Vulnerability, once exposed, doesn't retreat easily. As the weeks passed, Ethan became aware of a subtle shift. He looked forward to their conversations, measured time by shared deadlines rather than clock hours. Claire, in turn, seemed lighter in his presence, her professional edge softened by moments of reflection. Neither named what was forming between them, but both felt its pull. Ethan's restraint grew from fear as much as principle. Laura's betrayal had taught him how thin the line was between understanding and involvement. He refused to become someone else's justification for crossing it. When Claire leaned too close during a discussion, he stepped back. When conversations drifted toward what might have been, he redirected them. Each boundary felt necessary and yet quietly disappointing. Claire noticed the distance. Her responses became shorter, her smiles more restrained. She assumed she had misread his interest, that her honesty had made things uncomfortable. Pride prevented her from asking. Instead, she retreated into professionalism, restoring the barrier that had once defined their relationship. Ethan felt the change immediately. The office grew colder, not in hostility, but in absence. He told himself this was the correct outcome, that clarity was kinder than confusion. Still, when he returned home, the quiet seemed heavier than before. Oliver sensed his distraction and asked if something was wrong. Ethan said no, then corrected himself and said he was just tired. It was a truth that hit another. Late one night, as Ethan shut down his computer, Claire approached his desk with a file he had forgotten. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, Ethan saw disappointment, not anger. It unsettled him more than accusation would have. She thanked him for his work and turned away, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. Ethan watched her go, aware that he was standing at the edge of something unresolved. He had protected himself, perhaps even her, but protection often comes with a cost. As he gathered his things, he wondered whether distance truly prevented pain or merely delayed it. The question followed him out of the building and into the night, unanswered, waiting for circumstances neither of them could fully control. The distance between Ethan Parker and Claire Morrison did not last. It thinned quietly, worn down by circumstance rather than intention. A sudden restructuring at work demanded long meetings and difficult decisions, forcing them into close collaboration again. Professional necessity replaced avoidance, and with it returned the unspoken awareness neither had managed to erase. Stress changed the rhythm of their days. Deadlines tightened, tempers shortened, and the office took on a restless energy. Claire appeared composed as always, but Ethan noticed the small signs she could not fully conceal. The way she rubbed her temples when she thought no one was watching, the measured breaths before she spoke in meetings. He recognized the effort because it mirrored his own point one evening. After a tense meeting that ended without resolution, Claire closed her office door and finally allowed herself to sit. Ethan remained standing at first, uncertain of his role, but she gestured for him to stay. She admitted she felt responsible for holding everything together while everyone expected clarity she did not have. The confession was professional in content, but personal in tone, and it drew him closer despite his caution. Ethan responded with restraint, offering solutions instead of sympathy, but Claire shook her head. She said she didn't need answers in that moment, only honesty. The request unsettled him. Honesty had been dangerous before, opening doors he had struggled to close. Still, he told her he understood the pressure, that leadership often meant absorbing fear without showing it. The silence that followed was different from previous ones. It wasn't empty or careful. It felt weighted, as if both were considering words they knew would alter the balance between them. Claire broke it by admitting she had misinterpreted his earlier distance. She said she had thought he was judging her vulnerability, that she had embarrassed herself by speaking too freely. Ethan corrected her immediately. He explained that his restraint came from fear of repeating mistakes, not from lack of regard. He spoke of his marriage only briefly, just enough to make his boundaries comprehensible. Claire listened without interruption, her expression thoughtful rather than defensive. When he finished, she nodded, acknowledging the complexity without attempting to simplify it. That night, the line between professional and personal blurred in ways neither had planned. They talked longer than necessary, sharing fragments of their lives that felt safe in isolation but dangerous in accumulation. Claire spoke of how invisibility had shaped her, how success had not protected her from feeling unwanted. Ethan admitted that he no longer trusted his ability to read emotional signals, that betrayal had left him unsure of where responsibility ended and desire began. When they finally parted, nothing explicit had occurred, yet both sensed a shift. It was not attraction alone, but recognition, the unsettling comfort of being seen by someone who understood the cost of endurance. Ethan left with a familiar heaviness in his chest, the same feeling he had ignored once before because it seemed manageable. Take a tea home. Oliver was awake despite the late hour. He sat on the couch with a book open but unread, waiting. Ethan apologized, explaining work had run late. Oliver accepted the explanation, but asked a question that caught him off guard. He wanted to know if people could stop loving each other even when they didn't mean to. Ethan sat beside him, choosing his words carefully. He said love could change when people stopped being honest, especially with themselves. Oliver considered this, then asked if honesty could make people leave. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He realized he didn't know. The following days were marked by an undercurrent of tension. Claire seemed more open, less guarded, interpreting Ethan's honesty as permission rather than caution. She began to speak of possibilities in vague terms, of futures defined by clarity rather than isolation. Ethan listened, aware that his silence could be mistaken for agreement. Guilt settled in before any clear boundary was crossed. Ethan recognized the early signs of emotional infidelity, the way attention shifted subtly from home to work, from fatherhood to possibility. He reminded himself that nothing had happened, yet the reminder rang hollow. Intent, he understood now, mattered as much as action. The situation reached a quiet breaking point when Laura reappeared. She called unexpectedly, asking to meet to discuss Oliver's schedule. When they spoke in person, she appeared unchanged, confident, and composed. She mentioned regret without examining it, spoke of missed moments as if they were inconveniences rather than consequences. Ethan listened politely, feeling the distance between who he had been and who he was becoming. Laura's return clarified something he had been avoiding. He saw the contrast between relationships built on avoidance and those risking honesty. Yet he also saw the danger of mistaking intensity for integrity. As Laura left, Ethan felt no pull to follow her, only relief. Back at work, Claire approached him with a familiarity that assumed closeness. Ethan realized then that he was standing where Laura once had, explaining choices instead of making them. The recognition unsettled him deeply. That evening, as he prepared to leave the office, Ethan paused outside Claire's door, aware that the next conversation would determine whether he repeated the past or broke its pattern. He didn't know which path he would choose, only that avoidance was no longer an option. Ethan Parker did not knock on Claire Morrison's door. He stood there for a moment, steadying himself, then spoke her name softly through the open doorway. Claire looked up from her desk, surprised by the seriousness in his expression. She gestured for him to come in, already sensing that this was not another discussion about deadlines or strategy. Ethan closed the door behind him, not for secrecy, but for clarity. He told her he needed to speak before silence turned into misunderstanding. Claire listened, hands folded, her posture attentive but tense. She had been waiting for this conversation, though she did not know which version of it she feared more. He began by acknowledging what had formed between them, careful not to deny it or exaggerate it. He said connection was powerful precisely because it arrived quietly, disguised as understanding. Claire nodded, encouraged by his honesty. She admitted she had allowed herself to hope, believing his presence signaled readiness for something more. Ethan did not interrupt her. When she finished, he explained what hope had cost him before. He spoke of how easily emotional reliance could become a substitute for accountability, how betrayal often started long before lines were visibly crossed. He told her he was standing at a familiar edge and refused to pretend he didn't recognize it. Claire's composure wavered. She confessed that she had not intended to pressure him, that loneliness had distorted her expectations. Validation had felt like relief, not danger. Hearing this, Ethan understood her vulnerability but did not mistake it for compatibility. Understanding, he realized, was not the same as consent. He told her he needed to step back, not because he felt nothing, but because he felt too much without enough certainty. He said he would not build a future out of unresolved pain, his own or hers. Claire absorbed the words slowly, disappointment giving way to something quieter. She asked if this was rejection. Ethan said it was responsibility. The days that followed were restrained and respectful. They maintained professionalism, though the absence of familiarity was noticeable. Ethan felt the loss, but also a strange relief, as if he had chosen a harder truth over an easier illusion. At home, Oliver noticed the change in his father's demeanor. Ethan seemed more present, less divided. When Oliver asked if things were better, Ethan said they were clearer. Time passed without dramatic gestures. Claire requested a transfer to another department, citing professional growth. Ethan supported the move without protest. Their final conversation was brief but sincere. Claire thanked him for honesty she had not been ready to demand from herself. He wished her well without conditions. Months later, life settled into a quieter rhythm. Ethan focused on Oliver, on routines that rebuilt trust through consistency. He no longer defined himself by who had left, but by who remained. The fear that had once followed him softened, replaced by cautious confidence. One evening, an email arrived from Claire. It was brief, thoughtful, and unambiguous. She wrote that distance had given her perspective, that she had learned the difference between wanting to be chosen and being prepared to choose wisely. She did not ask for anything, only acknowledged what had been. Ethan read the message twice before responding. He wrote honestly, without promise or retreat. He said he was not going anywhere, not toward the past, not toward avoidance, but he would only move forward with clarity. Whatever came next would need patience, openness, and time. He closed his laptop and joined Oliver on the couch, the house filled with quiet that no longer felt empty. Outside, the world continued, uncertain and unfinished. Ethan did not know what the future held, but for the first time, he trusted himself to meet it without disappearing.